Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to everyone on this very cold Delhi evening. Thank you all for coming. I know it takes something to venture out, so very happy that you're all here, and very happy that almost everyone in this room is either a friend or a well-wisher, or, dare I say it, a fellow traveler. I wanted to say, I'm Ritu Menon, by the way, the publisher of Ananya's very lovely book. And I wanted to say that one of the most gratifying things for a publisher or an editor is to find that a hunch that you have about something, that a glimmer of something interesting that you think could come of an idea, actually works and strikes a responsive chord in readers. And I'm very, very happy to say that Ananya's book is one of those extremely happy developments for me personally, as a publisher, also as a reader, of course. I mean, we all know Ananya as a formidable scholar and as the author of the very highly regarded Righteous Republic. Not all of us know her as an essayist. And those of us who have read over the years some of her writing have, I think, recognized in that writing a very different authorial personality. Even though that personality reflects all of her skills and her strengths as a scholar. But what she brings to the essay is something very different. She brings to it a layered, searching, intimate experience, sensibility, perspective, reflection, meditation, something that we don't expect to read about cities. Cities are physical spaces, by and large. And the interesting thing is that in a couple of the events that she has had outside Delhi, at festivals and so on, her interlocutors have been architects and urban planners. And it strikes me that they probably thought they're going to read about cities in the way that they're accustomed to reading about cities. But Ananya has sort of subverted that whole expectation. And what she has done is to layer the city with memory and with intimacy and with poetry, so that that space and its intellectual and emotional contours become her intimate encounter with it. It's not something that you expect to read in the normal course. And I'm going to end very quickly because we're already at 10 to 7. I just want to say that one of the most insightful reviews of her book appeared this morning in the Tribune, written by an archaeologist. And I thought, this is the test of this book, that an archaeologist can find in it all of the layering that actually is present in every single one of the essays and in every single one of the cities that is present in this book. Thank you, Ananya, for doing this. And I have to say she's a dream author in many ways. I will not talk about how exasperating she can be as well, but she is a dream author in many ways because she responded to an idea. And that, for a publisher, is a very rare and a very precious trait in an author. And I have to say, she was also very prompt, which is another very, very rare quality. So thank you again. I'm delighted that Pallavi is with us as Ananya's interlocutor, an award-winning journalist and writer herself, and in fact, a fellow traveler, in a way, whose very recent book was, I think, launched a couple of weeks ago. It's called Travels in the Other Place. So over to both of you. Two elegant, exceptional women, two exceptional books. Thank you both.
Thank you for that introduction, Ritu, and a warm welcome to everyone this evening. It's a great pleasure to be here talking with Ananya about her new work, Place, which is really a kind of discursive mapping of personal geographies. Yeah, I think that's how I'd put it. It's about various places ranging from Delhi to Banaras to Bombay to New York to Dresden to Istanbul. And these are places where Ananya has lived in, where she has studied very often, where she has loved very often, and often where she has grieved. And, you know, in that sense, it's really an interaction and intersection of cities or places with the person of Ananya. And I think what's remarkable is that she's someone who approaches these places very fully rather than distractedly, as is the wont of our times. So I guess she's the embodiment of the 21st century flaneur, walking, charting, thinking, excavating. And this is a narrative that is also interwoven with your other human and intellectual relationships that you have often built up over a period of time. It is hypertextual, sensual, sensory, prismatic, lots of adjectives sort of come to mind. But I think I would like to begin by asking you about the thought process that went into this book, because I'm a journalist, I'm a foreign correspondent, an essayist, and you know, it's kind of my stock in trade to write essays which often center the subjectivity, which use the I. But in many ways, you are really a professional academic. You're a public thinker. Your previous book was Righteous Republic. And so as a kind of almost professional public intellectual, the use of the I is not always seen as the proper way of approaching subject matter, right? So then how did you end up writing this book in this manner, which is as much an exploration of the I that is Ananya as it is about place?
Well, I think I really wouldn't have. I mean, this book would not exist if it were not for Ritu. I can't see her. Where is she? Oh, for Ritu, because she was the one who came up with the idea that, as even though I'm an academic, I could possibly be the author of a book like this. I could possibly be the author of this sort of a book that I had already, in fact, been writing in a vein. Yes. I'd been writing in this vein, and that she had been following it over time. And that perhaps I didn't realize it, but she was pretty sure that there was a voice there. Which is not an academic voice, even if it's sometimes a bit scholarly. And so, and she had the title already in mind you. Wow. I mean, she said, it's going to be called this, and you are going to do a book, and you're going to do it with me. And I took some persuasion, I think, because I was, I said, well, first of all, this is not going to, it's not going to hang together, because many of the pieces were written many years ago, or they were not written with any kind of unified intention. They were written for different publications, on different occasions, for different reasons, for different editors in different countries, etc. So there was no sort of formal continuity or kind of even a genre, unity in these scattered pieces. Some were in travel magazines, some were in, more intellectual or literary forums. And of course, the one that we open with, I wrote for you when you were struggling with your illness and you needed other people to contribute to your blog to keep it going. And, when you asked me, I was just so amazed by you, actually, that you intended to keep your writing going and your sending out your weekly or your whatever monthly missive in the midst of the most horrific period in your life, and that you solved the problem of your hospitalization by simply asking friends to write in for you. And I
then became the very first chapter.
The first essay in this book, and I really kind of I did that, for you. I would maybe never have written that essay really otherwise, and so I ended up actually writing many of these essays for Ritu. Actually, more of them are written now than, as it says, 25 years ago, although technically one or two of them might be, old or published elsewhere. And it was Ritu really who, by being the kind of reader and editor she is, gave me the confidence to find my own voice and subjectivity in a very different way. As you're saying, as an academic, one would not venture the personal. One would refrain from putting it into one's prose, even as a in writing journalistically or writing opinion or the kind of political essays and things that one might write. It's not okay to get personal. But here, finally, I had the room to do that within limits. Ritu is very particular about those. But I found it really liberating and empowering, and it is making me rethink. I've been rethinking from the get-go, really, my decision to pursue an academic career in any formal sense. But, I've been on the fence about this from day one.
So I think that kind of came across quite clearly in the book, that you, from quite a young age, had some kind of writerly FOMO. I don't know if that's how one would put it. But I think I have a quote somewhere. Let me find it, where you said that you wanted to be a writer and you tried several times, but you sort of at some point decided you could not be this dazzling butterfly. I think that's how you put it. And so you went down an academic path instead. I suppose in many ways this is the fruition of all of those years of wanting to do a certain kind of writing and not finding the path to it. And it seems that you're finally there now. Certainly this is very, very lyrical, very beautiful writing. It's also, what you were saying about how when I asked you to do a blog post for me, the fact that you had this immediate sense of reaching out to me. Again, as somebody who has been a long-term traveler, and in fact, even in my latest book, I spend a lot of time, talking about what it means to be a good traveler. And I think one of the things is to develop this kind of cognitive empathy. And I think that, you sort of display that very much. in the kind of sentiment that you just espoused. But also in the book itself, you talk about having an almost kind of extreme empathy sometimes for people. It's like an extreme way. You say that you are drawn to those who suffer, addicted to inhabiting the pain of others. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, when I wrote the piece where I say that, I think I was definitely in that space of being obsessively empathic, you know, as a way of trying to perhaps, express solidarity in many cases with a variety of people and human situations, but also as a way of widening the ambit of my own experience. Because in some ways, my own sort of biography is quite boring and quite sequestered. And all of the exposure I've had, so to speak, is either through literature and reading, or through people, right? So in order to understand the world, I mean, my own experience is very limited. I've only been in, most of my life I've spent in a library, let's just say, or in a classroom. I mean, I'm just a sort of, like a bookworm, just locked up in my ivory tower. And so for me to bring to my writing a sense of the reality of the world around me, and the richness of it, and the difficulty of it, I need to learn from people, or be able to read them and what they're going through and what has happened to them and where they've been and what they've learned. And I tell you, I mean, I have found this again and again. I meet somebody new, I'm introduced to them in some completely banal way, in some, social or professional context. The minute you probe a little bit, it turns out that people have incredible stories of where they've been and what has happened to them. And there's no life that is untouched by suffering. None whatsoever. And sort of finding that again and again, in a way, first of all, helps you to handle whatever it is happening to you. It puts some distance, and you think, well, this is a truth. And this is part of being human. And, this will get over eventually for me as for anybody. I'm also a historian, so, looking in the long perspective of time, also you find that, people are going through certain things, and it's just part of the human condition. And you can take a step away from whatever it is you are experiencing or feeling, or what difficulties you have, to think about things on a larger scale and in an interpersonal manner. And one more thing which has changed for me since I wrote that piece, when I was completely just writing intuitively and also living without any structure of investigation into the human mind. I mean, between then and now, I have come to know Ashishda and read his work and talked to him and learned from him. And, I've become interested in the human personality, in the human mind, in the human, the emotional landscape of human beings. And I find that is much more interesting and educative for me than book knowledge, in a sense.
So many questions, but one that immediately comes to mind in response to your last sentence was that while perhaps the human connections have been expanding your book knowledge. Your book knowledge is also very much a companion in this particular book. And you obviously have these literary heroes and influences. I mean, Pamuk comes up very often, Sebald comes up very often. So talk to us a little bit about your literary influences, because they're almost protagonists as well as the cities themselves.
That's true. I mean, I've traveled in much of Europe with Sebald or through him. Or, the journey is as much about literally going there as it is about reading him and recognizing places, or even deliberately going to places because he has written about them. And if you know his writing, it's already a very complex mix of history, fiction, criticism. It's photography. It's nothing straightforward about it, right? So using somebody like that to travel with is also not a very it's not what a practical traveler would do. Let's just put it that way, right? Because you're constantly thinking about the past. You're thinking about the remnants of the past, the effects of the past, the traumas of the past, the traces of violence that cannot be erased by any amount of reconstruction. And that, for me, has become quite intrinsic to how I understand the so-called developed world. That it sits on centuries of violence. It's sometimes I have to remind myself that it's not that different here. But it's a very different mood. If you travel in Europe with Sebald, it's a very different Europe than if you were to travel with, I don't know, Gerald Durrell, or some sort of a happier, a happier exponent in some sense.
Can I just jump in here, Ananya, because sort of relating also to the earlier question, which was, when you said you were addicted to pain, there is this strain of melancholy, and it does seem to me that you are. There is a sense of the melancholy in the way in which you unpack the world. Why do you think that is? I just want to push you a little bit more on that. Is it the historian in you? I mean, yeah.
I remember reading this book a long time ago called The Melancholy of History, which is about historical method. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I've had a pretty happy life, touch wood, and I'm okay most of the time, But my perspective is not a happy one. I think.
You just feel the pain.
I do feel it, and I don't know. Maybe it has to do with my father. And the kind of poetry he wrote, or the kind of, intellectual and philosophical mood in which I was raised. Again, he too was a very sociable, very outgoing, very public person. So, sometimes you wonder why a person like that produced this quite dark oeuvre. And I think maybe, some of it is just sort of genetic. It's a proclivity, a tendency towards melancholia or something deeper than that. But also, I mean, you can't, you look around you and the world is full of injustice. This is what the world is, full of suffering. It is full of injustice. And most people are helpless. They're not to blame for the situation they're in, and they're also helpless to change it. And I find that I mean, that can be, empowering if you're involved in political struggle and so on. It can be sort of a reason to fight, right? But as an observer, as a writer, you have to think about, why this is the case. And I don't know. I do feel and I feel the injustice of things more and more, I have to say. Part of it is also, being steeped in social science discourse and being quite aware of the structures of inequality and injustice. I spent a long time working on Ambedkar, which made me think about Indian society in a particular way. I've spent time, as I've written in this book, thinking about the Holocaust and about, genocidal violence in Europe. And that also has sort of impacted me. I mean, these are things which, you don't just sort of write your paper and you're done with it. It's something that changes you. That's the way it has been for me. Yeah.
You were sort of talking about the structures of inequality, and not only in places, but I think one of your chapters about Sanskrit, there's also about the structures of inequality in language, and that particular chapter is based, surprisingly to me, mostly in Bangalore, right? I mean, we think of Bangalore as tech or whatever, software, outsourcing, but you went there to study Sanskrit, and then you have this absolutely beautiful essay, The Death of Sanskrit. But you also say that you spent most of your time in Bangalore crying. So tell us about that. Why did you spend most of your time in Bangalore crying? What was it about that whole process of learning Sanskrit? Why had you gone there to learn Sanskrit to begin with? Tell us a bit more about the themes that you unpack in that chapter.
That was that was a very special chapter for me. The Death of Sanskrit is an essay by my advisor, Sheldon Pollock, which everybody who's interested in Sanskrit and Indology and so on has read. But it's about, historically, it's about 4 points in the history of Sanskrit where a certain kind of discursive and scholarly world comes to an end. And there are particular political and historical conditions under which that happens. And of course, people have found it very offensive because, and he's been attacked a lot, especially by, certain kind of nativist scholar saying, who are you to pronounce the death of this undying language? And it's Anadi Anant. I mean, what do you mean by the death of Sanskrit? So that's, the title is an homage to him. But I was in Bangalore, as I write, following my teacher, D.R. Nagaraj, who died actually before I began my research. And I mean, he had a heart attack and he just dropped dead, and he was 44 years old. And so I had already set up to go there. I had my fellowship and my fieldwork and my project and everything. And he had introduced me to a variety of people. And before I could get there, he died. So always I arrived in Bangalore kind of in the wake of DR's death. And then I realized, which I should have, already going in, that Bangalore is not a place to study Sanskrit. I was there exactly. I arrived there in, something like November or December 1999. Y2K was about to happen. And everything I saw in Bangalore in the year 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003 was all about the internet and the Silicon Valley of India and, the whole sort of IT boom. And here I was sort of thinking, oh, I'll go to Mysore and I'll read with this Pandit, and I'll go to, travel all over Karnataka, and then I also needed to do work in Maharashtra, so I was also kind of half in Pune at the time, um, and it was just, it was just a, I don't want to use the word because it's a rude word, but it just really scrambled my brain to be in the midst of this kind of epochal cultural churn where Bangalore was all about, the new India, the kind of new technologies, new communications, a certain kind of very, very new cosmopolitanism, and whatever its connection to the history of Karnataka or the history of the Deccan or the history of South India, etc. Nobody was interested in that. Nobody was interested in that, except for me with my sort of manuscripts and my questions, and I couldn't fit in that world. I did in a sense because I had all these friends who were doing all these new things, but I don't know, I just felt the pain of being at odds with history, you could say, and that bubble burst quite quickly, mind you, and Bangalore today is an urban disaster, which it need not have been, but I think the deeper questions of the continuity or the disruption of cultural life, of knowledge systems, of sustainable environments, and of social inequality and social justice. Those are perennial. While these kind of epiphenomena that one experienced in such a kind of dazzling way have sort of faded or failed. I would say, Viksit Bharat, etc. A lot of it, India shining. It was also at the time, the first government of the NDA that I was there during. And in 2002, actually, when Gujarat happened, that sort of completely threw everybody. And I ended up then stopping whatever I was doing, and I taught a class at the National Law School about communalism and the law, and caste communalism and the law. What I mean is that the contemporary took over, and I felt even more kind of alienated from my own historical and, whatever pre-modern sorts of questions that I had for my dissertation work. I had to sort of respond to what was happening in the environment.
But even leaving aside the sort of what was happening with the contemporary, the actual process of learning Sanskrit was difficult because of the people that you were learning with and the assumptions that they had about who should properly be learning Sanskrit and so on. So could you talk, well, that was difficult as well, right? It wasn't just a response. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, what is this world like of the Sanskrit teachers, learners, the people who actually carry those traditions forward, and then you're trying to, quote unquote, infiltrate that? Yeah.
I've written about this actually many times in other essays which are not here. And people get very upset with me because they say, I'm a woman, I've studied Sanskrit, what's your problem? And Sanskrit doesn't debar anyone. I'm not a Brahmin, I've studied Sanskrit, what's your problem? Why are you being critical of...
So perhaps explain what...
Yeah, but that's a simplistic response, I think, to the reality of... See, there's a layer of language, all right? and it's very beautiful, it's very complicated, it has many different genres, registers, discourses, histories, etc. And that is one way to go. Then there's a set of social assumptions and questions of access that are built into it, from which non-male and non-Brahmin language users are explicitly and continuously excluded, right? So it is patriarchal, it is sexist, right? And yes, there are many things in literature, in Sanskrit literature, which overcome those structural assumptions about the nature of society and the nature of the world, right? Which Sanskrit is addressing through various texts. However, the kind of texts that I was reading, which were legal texts, legal digests, medieval digests, about Varna and Varnashrama Dharma, about the caste system, about Shudras and Shudra Dharma, etc. I mean, they were just irreconcilable with the demands of egalitarian modernity. Yeah. Okay? Now, as someone who is committed to the appreciation, the preservation, and the understanding of our past and our history and our traditions, while at the same time being committed to egalitarian values, morally, socially, politically, right? You are constantly struggling with two systems of belief that are not at all easy to reconcile. And practitioners, such as there are, they're usually within religious institutions. They're within mathas, in Karnataka especially, or they're within various kinds of Sanskrit sectarian institutions, which could be pedagogical institutions, or they could be monastic institutions, etc. So it's mostly men. It's almost always men, actually. And even if you come to it through some kind of a baffle of the university department or the modern college, or you're coming from a department of Indology in the West, and you're just interested philologically, you're not sort of questioning the social reality that accompanies these texts, in which those texts are embedded. Even if that is the case, they are not necessarily able to engage with you as a real person who is also a fellow Indian, yes. Who is also a product of Indian democracy and equal citizenship and can equally well go and vote and so on. And, being very educated is not going to get you very far. Just being educated in the kind of bookish sense, or having the degrees, or having the permissions to enter the archives and so on, or as I say somewhere, like wearing a sari, or wearing one's hair long and so on. I mean, it's just not enough, because at the heart of this exercise are very deep questions about the very nature of Indian society. Right? And those are long-running problems, very much exacerbated and complicated by the colonial experience. And as somebody who's hyper-aware of all this, there's always a kind of meta position. Like, I can't just go and sit quietly, alti-palti marke with my pen and paper and just translate my text as my teacher tells me. It's not like that. I also have questions. I also want to know more. I also object to what is being said, because in many places it's violent and shocking, And that's actually what turned me towards Ambedkar, because I think he articulates that experience of the shock of what entering the Sanskritic world, brings to you. He articulates it without embarrassment and without confusion because he sees himself as an outsider to it, you know. But as somebody who sees herself as an insider to it, right, on account of my education or my family or whatever, it's much more difficult to face the facts. That's what it is. That's why I was crying all the time. I mean, literally.
You said that political modernity in India is the result of the coupling of Gandhi and Ambedkar, which meant that caste on the one hand with Ambedkar and religion on the other hand with Gandhi are really the DNA of modern India, and that the emergence of the modern from pre-modernity continues to be the kind of question that is haunting modern India today. So tell us, can you expand on that a little bit and also sort of delve into some of the places that you have visited in your book to sort of try to answer that question? So you have chapters on Mumbai, for example, when you go and visit the areas where the followers of Ambedkar come during celebrations for his birthday and so on. So just take that that idea about the coupling of Gandhi and Ambedkar as being the sort of foundational problematic of modern India today, and try and answer what you mean by that, while also touching on places and the cities that have helped you to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I've written another book with Gandhi and Ambedkar properly in it, and it's mainly about them. And I'm trying to write another book about Ambedkar, perpetually trying. So there's many other places that I visited in pursuit of both of these people. But in India, wherever you go, I feel two questions are always front and center. A question about freedom and a question about dignity, I would say. And you can think about Gandhi as being a kind of protagonist in the quest for freedom, which I've done in my other book, and Ambedkar as being the protagonist of the quest for dignity. And the quest for freedom also has a rich history because most Indian sort of religious and philosophical traditions are concerned with personal freedom, with liberation from, human suffering, with community and group freedom, and then of course through the anti-colonial movement. I mean, the centerpiece of that is Swaraj, and the kind of author of that in many ways is Gandhi. But with independence, the question of dignity becomes much more central with the constitution and with formal equality. And that also has a deep history in the Bhakti movement and in many other religious protest movements. You could go all the way back even to the Buddha, right? In revolt against caste society and so on. So when I say Gandhi and Ambedkar, I'm just sort of as a shorthand, as heuristics to suggest these two themes and the centrality of these two themes to the Indian experience, and to give that it's a kind of shorthand for long historical processes, right, which are still very much with us. And it just for me, they're kind of like compasses. They are a moral compass, but they're also a shorthand for long histories of struggle and of quest, which are part of the Indian condition in many ways.
In the context of this book, there were also sort of navigational compasses, like geographic compasses that led you to certain cities. So, yeah.
Yeah, because, for Gandhi, I mean, I didn't write about Ahmedabad because I don't know it well enough, but certainly, I mean, there's an essay on Sabarmati somewhere in my head. I've followed Ambedkar in Bombay, in London, in New York, and then also gone to various archives, houses where he lived, places where he studied, places where he's commemorated, and so on. And that's a whole itinerary in itself, right? I mean, you could think of it as a research itinerary, as work towards a book or a biography or something like that. But it's been sort of a journey, for me, because it's taken me into the very tangible worlds of the disenfranchised. I mean, at one stage I had to step back and I had to decide that this is not going to be a book about Ambedkarism, because it was, again, something that I felt I had very little entry into, in terms of lived struggles and lived realities. But Ambedkar himself is, interestingly, so much an ideas man, and he's also so widely traveled, and he's so scholarly. In many ways I could just easily identify with his way of thinking historically and politically. And so that in a way he became a sort of, I don't know what to call him, like a touchstone or a homing beacon or a lighthouse or something like this. Like no matter where I'm going, if there's an Ambedkar connection, I'm going to go and look at it. I'm going to go and visit it. If there's a person there to meet, I'm going to go and meet that person, like that. And similarly for Gandhi, and also for Tagore, actually, but that's a different.
It's missing from the book, actually, Tagore.
Except in the Shantiniketan chapter, yeah.
So, you posed the question, and this question is what appears in some of the blurbs on Amazon and so forth, which is, how do we lose what we lose? How do we love whom we love? And I guess, posing that question, your referent for that are multiple, right? There's cities, there's books, there's ideas, but above all else, to me as a reader, it seemed like they were your parents. And you were sort of in dialogue when it came to this question with your relationship with your parents, with their histories, with your histories as a family. So talk to us about them as people, as influences, and also as loss.
Yeah, I was thinking, Pallavi, that, as I was preparing to talk to you, that, it takes one to know one. And, you've also written very personally about motherhood, about childbirth, about breastfeeding, about raising children internationally, interculturally, about the death of your mother, about, you've written, about your physical, familial, emotional experiences, which are very much tied to your immediate family, your parents and your brother and your children and your husband. And so I had a feeling when we were deciding to do this, that there's many points in which we probably have had we have a lot in common. Yeah. And I think somehow I have I might give the impression in this book, I think. Now I'm thinking this more and more, that my main sort of the thing I have to say about my parents is that I lost them. But that's not the case, in fact, right? I mean, they both died at a ripe old age, Neither of them suffered particularly, except my mother a little bit. And, all told, they had interesting, complicated, happy lives, and we did as a family. And both have left behind enough that, there's no reason for me to be mourning them all the time or be grieving over them all the time. It was at the time of each of their deaths very difficult. And I think that comes through a lot in this book. But going forward, more and more, I think,
But you also talk about their lives. And
I do talk about their lives.
and his experiences in Bombay, for example. So it's not all about mourning them. So I want you to tell us a little bit more about them. Just tell us about them, like I said, as influences, as people. Loss, perhaps you can leave out in this particular conversation. People will come to it when they read the book.
It's funny. Actually, it was my editor, my publisher Ritu, who pointed out to me that I kept retelling my father's funeral. And she's like, this is the fourth time you've mentioned it in 4 different essays or something. And each time it's slightly different, right? So A, why are we sort of fixated on this? And B, this is not a memoir about your father or your relationship with your father. Fair enough, true enough, and I realized that I was doing that. I was just rewriting that. Literally the rituals of both of their deaths, the cremations and the immersion of the ashes in the river and so on. And then in another place in the Bombay essay, actually I had much more about my parents and my dad and my mom and dad and their love affair and so on, which again Ritu said was inappropriate. Now I didn't really quite agree or understand as to why it's inappropriate, because they told the story themselves. Anybody who knows them anyway knows the story. And all parties are dead and gone. So if I'm relating, and who else will tell their story? I'm their only child, And I didn't find it wrong on my part, but sometimes you have to bow to greater powers. Sometimes, every time you have to, or else, So I kind of, we lost those lines, let's just say. Somewhere in the editorial process, those sentences disappeared. My parents were both academics. My father was a creative writer as well. My mother was an activist as well. And they were married for 50 years till my father died. They were... it's hard to sort of... They were very much... bound up with one another and with me. I mean, we were kind of like a 3-headed monster, And when I got my PhD, it just became like this big joke. Which Dr. Vajpeyi are we talking about, when anybody came to the house. And this is not the place where I've written about it, but I did have my problems with them, let me just put it that way. Obviously, anybody who's running off as much as I am and who's like doing whatever the hell they want to do, is going to cause some anxiety to their parents. And even if they're very liberal, they're going to be a little bit worried by the kinds of decisions and choices that I was making. And I had to sometimes sort of, fight to keep them at arm's length. But in the end, I would say I failed completely to keep them at arm's length. They're just inseparable. They're inseparable from me, and maybe that's their way of protecting me from this overwhelming sense of loss that at least in the moment of their respective death, was unavoidable. But for the most part, I'm able to get by, I think, because the sum of their love basically exceeds the end of it. Yeah, it doesn't end really.
So, one of the greatest balms for loss, for injustice, for pain, for all these difficult things, I think, is poetry. And I mean, of course, you have a very poetic voice. I was talking to my brother who was reading the book yesterday, that large parts of it actually read like prose poems of place. But there's also the chapter that you have on the Indo-Persian sublime, which is set in New York. And I think it would be lovely if maybe you could read a little bit from that for us, perhaps reading some of Khusro's poetry and your observations around that before we open it up to questions.
Oh gosh, there's so much poetry in this. It's beautiful. Okay, so this essay is called the Indo-Persian Sublime. In some senses, it's an essay about the Pakistani-American painter Shazia Sikandar. It's also an essay about New York, where she lives, and where I met her. And it's also an essay about Delhi, and about Amir Khusro and Nizamuddin Aulia. So it's it's all of these things. And in the course of talking about her painting and both these cities of New York and New Delhi, I have quoted from some of Khusro's verse, or attributed to him at any rate. This is all commonly sung in qawwalis and so on. And I just translated the songs, but you would probably recognize them from my translations. They're not necessarily philologically accurate, but I think they're more or less correct. Yeah. In Delhi, the city of the Sufi saint Nizamuddin Aulia, the summer heat is excruciating. When the monsoon arrives, one can glimpse paradise. Paradise is really a garden in the rain. Paradise is the crowding of the summer sky with clouds so dark they are almost black. It is trees restless in the wind laden with water, the deep sound of thunder, intimations that relief will pour out of the sky onto the taut, waiting earth. Amir Khusro, the greatest poet of Indo-Persian culture in medieval times, wrote his verses and composed his tunes in Delhi. It was the heat that gave him words, the rain that gave him music. Delhi was the crucible of Khusro's poetry. In his city, peacocks danced in bejeweled choreography, parrots rose into the air in vortices of green. The Yamuna was swollen in the monsoon. The sky sputtered with unshed rain like laughter held back. Into this rapture came Khusro's poems, spirals of song, heaving, lurching, reckless melodies. Lightning flashed like the inundated city and its gardens, poet and river in flood, a love-making of language, the like of which has not been heard on the subcontinent in the 7 centuries since. Khusro's oeuvre is among humanity's most exquisite artifacts. Qawwali, the style of Sufi music and singing he is said to have invented, takes the tears out of one's heart, fills up one's eyes to the brim. Kavali is the great coming of rain, of love, of deliverance. It touches one in places only a lover may reach. It opens doors known only to teachers. It rises from the city of Delhi into the heavens. It is a storm and the city is its eye. Khusro's verses hover, flash, growl and pour. He sings for the ages. My heart is so enamored of you, love. I cannot bear to look at your face. I am smitten, stricken. You glance at me and armies advance. Your armies advance. I shall be routed. Okay, I'm just going to skip a little bit ahead to where the poetry is. So I'm now in Shazia Sikandar's studio in Dumbo, which is a part of Brooklyn. It's 2004, about 15 years after I first began listening to Kavali. Here in this gritty part of Brooklyn, Shazia Sikandar's studio, it has a high ceiling. It is lit by a very large window whose glass is grimy with age. The room is crowded with canvases, wooden frames, art books, paint, CDs, brushes, boards, and the uncontainable creativity of its occupant. She is a slight figure, dwarfed by her own loft space, but her mastery of the miniature form is quite unprecedented. Far from Delhi, in a city without gardens, once again, the Indo-Persian sublime takes shape. Painting is perfection. My arms are fair, my bangles green. You took me by the hand, you pulled me close. My bangles broke, green glass. You know this Hari Hari Churiya. What Khusro did for poetry in the Indo-Persian world, no one else had done until his time. He made it, fashioned it in the languages of the Gangetic Plains that until then did not have a poetic register. It was a feat akin to the divine intelligence creating the world. We cannot even begin to comprehend the novelty, the effulgence of making poetry for the first time in a tongue of everyday commerce and conversation. For us, language is a worn coin, cheapened by use, saturated with significance, and depleted in value. Code floods our world, drowns all meaning. We can scarcely even imagine, let alone remember, such an inaugural minting of poems as Khusro achieved in the 13th century. Who says poetry cannot be written in Hindavi, that Persian alone is worthy? Persian is fine wine, Hindavi crude liquor, but we know which is more intoxicating. Shall I stop?
I think perhaps we have some questions because we don't have that much time left. So I'd love to take a few questions, anything that you might have for Ananya from her book, comments, and then we will also have a book signing after that. If anybody has any questions or comments, please raise your hand.
I want to read one other bit.
Go ahead then. Do you want to see if there's any questions, and then depending on that we can. Then do you want to go ahead and read?
So it's just a later part of the same essay, and this again I'm reading because actually I first got to know Pallavi because we both had lived in different points of time in Nizamuddin. And we were both concerned at one point with Delhi's air pollution. And she was considering moving back to Delhi for a bit with her diplomat husband and whether they should take the posting or not. But she was concerned for her children, who were quite small at the time, because of the crazy air pollution. And we kind of talked about that. So I'm going to read you a part which talks about, in a sense, the loss of Delhi, which all of us have experienced, at least those of us who've known this city any time in the last few decades. In my Delhi, where Khusro and his beloved Sufi master Nizamuddin lie buried close together, married beyond their mortal coils, beggars mill at the traffic signal. Their bodies are so mutilated by poverty they do not even have arms to stretch out in beggary, hands with which to tap the closed windows of air-conditioned cars, or legs to carry them from one waiting vehicle to the next. Lights turn red, orange, green, red, orange, green. I look for the Yamuna but do not see it. I look for peacocks. I look for rain. The sky is empty. The air burns. I see the poor with their missing limbs. In New York, I see the skyline with its absent towers. This is post 9/11. For our meeting, love, I made up my face so carefully. One look at your face and I forgot my own. You looked in my eyes, my composure was lost. You looked in my eyes and took from me my modesty. One look and you made a bride of me.
Yeah, we have a question over there. Yeah. Is there? Should we just pass the mic?
I speak loud enough. Thank you. This was a wonderful event, Ananya, and I just wanted to ask you what went into the conceptualization of this book. You expect it to be maybe a touristy kind of book, maybe a personal memoir, but this has so many things woven into it, and I wondered if you would like to talk about that a bit.
Thanks, Gitanjali. Thank you so much. No, I wasn't. It wasn't meant to be a travelogue by any means. And as I said, a lot of the essays pre-existed any idea of this book, right? So when you read the book, you'll find that it's quite not a travelogue. In some sense. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the interest really, although it has a couple of pieces of fiction, supposed fiction. Actually, they're not fictional in reality. Yeah, The Archivist and The American Triptych. I mean, they're non-fiction disguised as fiction. But anyway, what I was most eager to do actually was to explore the form of the essay, the form of the non-fiction essay, and stay with my interest in intellectual and literary history, right? So that's what I was sort of getting out of this exercise so far as possible. Like, my essay on Venice is, it's hardly about Venice in some sense, you could say, right? It begins with a meeting my father had before I was born with Samuel Beckett in Paris. And, how he wrote about that and how he remembered that and what things of Beckett's we have in our house and so on, photographs and books and so on. And, I don't know, 40, 50 years after that, me meeting Giorgio Agamben in Venice. And, how this becomes like a pivot point in one's intellectual life, meeting with some great thinker that one admires or some great literary figure that one admires, who is so far away from you in real life that the chances that you would, my father would get to meet Samuel Beckett or I would get to meet Giorgio Agamben are pretty near vanishing. But, there we were. And so many ways that the city where this happened becomes a part of that whole experience. Similarly with Pamuk in Istanbul. For 1 year, I had the sort of amazing luck of living in the same building as him, one floor down from where he lived. And this completely changed my sense of what Istanbul is, because I mean, I'd already been reading him, but then I also got to literally see the city from his balcony, and talk to him about so many things. And it just, the I was again in Istanbul also, still trying to read Sanskrit and not being able to do it. And then I revisited Auerbach, who wrote my Mises in Istanbul when he was sort of in exile from Nazi Europe, and from memory, because he didn't have access to his books. And Edward Said writes about Auerbach writing about the Western canon in Istanbul as a Jewish refugee from the Holocaust in this place where he has nothing, which is not even properly Europe, right? And the kind of greatest text he produces is mainly from what he remembers of the idea of Europe. Anyway, so I kind of, for me that was reading Said, reading Auerbach, reading the Western canon and writing it in Istanbul was for me as much a part of traveling in Istanbul as, whatever I could tell you about which museum to go to, or which coffee shop to hang out in, or which neighborhood to go shopping in, etc. For me, that was very meaningful, because I also felt out of place in the city, and unable to relate to the texts that I was supposed to be working on while living in this beautiful place which has its own history and its own past and its own problems. I don't know if that answers your question. But the essay form, I mean, the freedom that the essay form allows you is something I was keen to explore, and something I've learned again from Ashish Da, who's never actually properly written a book in his life. I mean, all he's written are these essays, really. But everything you need to say, if you can say it in an essay, why should you write a book? It's a question worth asking. I mean, I now reconsider the question of the monograph. I know philosophers, economists, and mathematicians have gone past this, and many kinds of scientists, I think, right, have gone past this problem. But yeah.
Yes, my brother, Shekhar.
Hello. Okay. Thank you. So, Ananya, I've just started reading the book. I've just read 2 chapters. I find it absolutely exquisite. And as somebody coming to your work for the first time, I'm actually reminded of this guy called Jorge Luis Borges, who also abjured long-form books, but was a master of the essay and short fictions. The question I had for you is actually based on, what you said about the death of Sanskrit, which is a chapter I haven't yet read. But I wanted to ask whether you think it's any different from other classical languages like Latin. Now, if you think of Latin, that's another language which today is perhaps kept alive by only academic practitioners and men, and they're overwhelmingly men of the cloth, who learn it in a religious context, with all its layering of the exclusionary practices of the Catholic Church and all kinds of social hierarchies which are sort of interwoven into the language. Is there something particular you think about Sanskrit, or is it just on par with other classical languages which reflect the times in which they evolved?
Well, the book that I was in the middle of writing when Ritu interrupted me is about the modern life of Sanskrit. And I have to kind of now go back and finish that book. But in the course of writing that book, I have reflected indeed for a long time on how Sanskrit does and doesn't compare with other classical languages of the world, including can't hear? huh? Um, including, including, of course, Latin and Greek, but also, Arabic, Hebrew, Chinese, classical Japanese, Ottoman Turkish, you know, all the classical languages. So what is particular about Sanskrit, Persian, of course, and so on. So what's interesting is that many of these languages, almost all of them, I would say all of them, have been repurposed and reinvented and modernized as national languages for a people, right? That's true of Arabic, that's true of Chinese, that's true of Hebrew, that's true of, right? So they've become sort of tied to the fortunes of the nation state. There is modern Greek, which is very little related to classical Greek. There is, of course, Italian has a different story relative to, and all the Romance languages relative to Latin. I wouldn't say that Latin has been remade as a modern national language, but all of the others, and Turkey I was able to study in some detail because I've spent so much time in Turkey and living there and seeing what is happening in terms of the invention of modern Turkish and the expulsion of Ottoman Turkish, including with its script and everything. It's now written in Roman, right? So what is interesting is that, first of all, Sanskrit is not the national language of India. And although there is some debate about this in the Constituent Assembly, there's no way that this can come to pass. Because, I mean, as Ambedkar's logic goes, at least it equally excludes everyone. So, in that sense, maybe it's more fair than any of the modern vernaculars as a national language, if you set English aside for a minute. But anyway, Sanskrit never becomes modern. There's no such thing as modern Sanskrit, which is the national language of India, right? At the same time, it continues its life in religion and liturgy and in ritual and in various kinds of scholarship, right? It's not dead in those realms at all. And it also has a life through its genetic relationship with most modern Indian languages, right? So it has a peculiar existence, in a sense. There's no speech community associated with it, right? But it's not indecipherable or incomprehensible at some level for many Indians, no matter what their own native language is, which Indian language they speak. So there are different points of comparison and difference that I consider vis-a-vis other so-called classical languages, including this kind of, the very trope of the classical. What is classical about classical India? What is classical about Sanskrit, right? What is modern about it? And if it's purely a classical language or it's purely a dead language, then why is it so politically salient, right? Why does it have the kind of political life that it has for the Indian state and especially for the Hindu nationalist project, right? When nobody can understand it, let's assume, nobody can speak it, right? Why do we have, Sanskrit broadcast on radio? Why do we have films made in Sanskrit? Why do we have spoken Sanskrit classes all over the country? What is the purpose exactly of that sort of popularization of a language that intrinsically resists any kind of popular or mass access because of the very kind of defining features of this language as a as not a language of everyday use? really just a literary and a language of erudition par excellence, a technical code in many ways. Great. Anyway, you'll have to wait to read my next book for a proper discussion on Sanskrit.
Has a comment, so yes.
I have only one question to ask you. You are so fluent and lucid during the question and answer period, and so much at ease. Why was it that when you were participating in the dialogue, you only look to her or your book, and never at this entire house of audience? What says about your the psychology of it? Do you agree with it? Am I truthful?
So you analyze it.
That I will tell you.
You want to say something? You want to say what it says?
No, I have to do you. I will give you the.
Analysis.
Do we have time for another question?
I don't know. Ritu?
We passed the time.
One more?
Thank you.
Now that you raised a personal, you asked a very personal question, you made a personal comment. I just wanted to ask this very personal question. You mentioned your father was a creative writer, your mother was an activist, and you decided to pursue a similar field. Now with three, PhDs in the same family, how was it? Did you feel the pressure? Usually kids, who have high achieving parents, they don't want to follow the same field. They don't want to be in the same field because it's just a lot of pressure. Some kids don't want to be in the shadow. So did you try running away, or how did you handle that? Before I read the book, I just want to have this background.
has a question. One more question.
Yeah, I have a very simple question because I was under the impression you were working on Ambedkar. So what happened to the Ambedkar project? Are you going to continue with that or give it?
Ashiza, I wasn't looking at everybody because I did not want to be distracted by closed eyes, people sleeping, nodding off, snoring, or smiling, or people on their phones texting, or whatever. No, that's not true. I was just focused and concentrated.
I'm very compelling and charismatic. It's hard to take your eyes off me, Ashishta. That is the reason.
She's right, though, actually. That's true. No, she's right.
Just
She's
give
right.
you an out of there.
She was looking at you the way as if she was looking at a police inspector.
Police inspector?
Police inspector.
No, not at all. Of course not. I think so. Ashish is, I think he's used to being my main interlocutor, and only interlocutor on most days. Sorry, Ashita, I should have addressed you more. But you're there in the book, so I don't want to embarrass you with too much limelight. Your question. Actually, I really tried my best. I took science in school. I didn't even do Sanskrit in 8th or whatever. I did French in 9th and 10th or whatever the option was. I prepared to take the IIT entrance, and I wanted to study physics at St. Stephen's College, which of course some people have done, but I failed to do. Anyway, but I was just very bad at math. That was one problem. The other problem is that I was always writing things instead of reading for my JEE, whatever, my tutorial brilliance, whatever those things were that one used to get to prepare for the entrance exams and things. I was a very dreamy and distracted teenager. I was not at all studious as I should have been. And then luckily, I say luckily, 2 nights before the board exam, I got chicken pox. And it seemed for a while that I would not be allowed to take the board exam. I'd have to repeat my 12th class because they would have to sequester me with my boils and whatever, fevers and this and that. Anyway, they finally found a way to let me take the exam in a separate room with a separate, invigilator. But my marks were like just barely, decent in my science papers. And so, despite my, attempt, I ended up in an English department, in a college which only had, in LSR, which only had the arts. And I mean, I thought that this is, this is just like, what do you call it? Like, ऊपर वाले की लाठी, that ये तो मेरे साथ बहुत बुरा हुआ, that I ended up in a literature department. My mother taught English lit at a college in South Delhi her whole life. All her books were in the house. I never had to buy any books or anything. And I just thought, this is just such a cop-out. Like, life has cheated me of this exciting career in science, and now I'm just stuck doing whatever my parents are doing endlessly. But over time, I realized that, it was probably a good thing. I mean, I dodged a bullet. That's why I said luckily. At the time, it didn't feel lucky at all. It felt like a complete disaster that diverted me from my destiny as a scientist. But it was not to be. And Mujib, you're right. I was in the middle of writing all kinds of other things, which, as I said, Ritu interrupted by proposing this book out of nowhere. But when you read it, you'll see that the whole chapter, pretty much on Bombay, is in a way about Ambedkar. And also this chapter about Bangalore, which is about D.R. Nagraj, has a lot of Ambedkar in it. So Ambedkar is not going anywhere. I keep trying to drop him, but he doesn't leave me. So eventually, when the time is right, there will be a book. I promise. I shouldn't say that, but I do. Anyway, thanks.
Okay. So, big round of applause, please, for Ananya. She's very happy to sign books. Thank you very much for being here this evening.
And thank you. Clearly, I was riveted by you.
I just said no names, it's all right.
Sorry.
That was a really interesting story about the science.
I didn't know about the science story. Yeah, that's interesting. I thought nothing personal. किसी ने पूछा, let me just take it out.
Ananya, lovely. Very nice. Thank you. Nice talking.
No, everyone is scattered. So my kids are in college in California. Yeah. So in fact, so one of the reasons I was able to move is that we've become close. So it's no longer and my mother is work back on South Asia. So she's constantly